Hello orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. The video today is a little different. We're going to look at quite a few different orchids and share a little bit of their updates and also some of the problems that they were having, and also give you a little bit of insight into what I had done or not have done to these orchids and the reasons why. Right now it's end of summer, and with spring and summer usually we will have most orchid blooming, and after they finish blooming, you are dealing with spikes that are potentially turning yellow, right? And what do you do with it? I get this question a lot. When do I cut the flower spike? Well, my general rule of thumb with flower spike is if they're green, you don't cut it. Whether they are sequential bloomer or not, if it's green, don't cut it. I would only cut flower spikes when they are turning yellow. And sometimes I would even wait until they become absolutely dry to cut it, because I believe that whatever juice or sap that's still in the spike itself can be recycled or taken back by the plant itself for additional nutrients. So I usually wait until it's yellowing, and sometimes I would even until it's absolutely dry to cut the flower spike off. And how much spike to cut off, it really depends on your personal preference. Some people say cut it right before or above the first node. Sometimes I actually leave longer flower spike, because sometimes how I handle my orchid is I actually just pull up my orchid by its flower spike. For this one that you see, I actually cut it really short because this one is potted in semi-hydro, and with orchids in semi-hydro you can't really just pull on your orchid because they may potentially get completely pulled out of the media. So I cut it really short. But sometimes if they're traditionally potted or they're still in sphagnum moss that you know that they're completely secure, and you know it's totally fine to just grab them by their flower spike. And that's how I sometimes pick up orchids in grocery stores too, because sometimes they're packed, they're one after another, and it's really hard to reach to the pot area and lift it up. So I will actually just handle the orchids from their flower spikes. And the next orchid is my Phalaenopsis Acho. This one is one of the few larger Phalaenopsis orchids I have, and this one had primary spike and then secondary spike after they finished blooming. It was after 2 months after the secondary spike finished blooming that it started to get the spike started to get yellow. So I cut it. And for those of you who are new to the orchid growing hobby, it's good to use some cinnamon powder to dab it a little bit, so that way you help the incision or the cut of the spike to scab or heal quickly, to avoid potential infection of any kind. And this orchid currently is still in bark chips, its original bark chip mix, but I had repotted this one back into its original media and pot, but I sifted out a lot of the broken down bark chips or the smaller pieces, and what's left is the bigger chunks. And based on what I see, I think this orchid can still be in this bark chip media for another 6 months or so, well, probably longer than that, because next spring is when I will definitely have to repot this orchid. Okay, so this is my Dr. Martin. Its first flower spike is yellowing, but the second one is sequentially blooming, and I will try to find time to make another video to give you an update. Now, speaking of yellow, let's talk about yellowing leaf as well. If you see here, it's only one leaf yellowing, and it's the very bottom leaf, and if you look at the roots and the leaves, you know this orchid is doing okay. And this is just its own natural retirement, right, rejuvenation process. So they shed their bottom leaves, their oldest leaf. Orchids do that. So when this happened, don't worry. What you need to worry is when they yellow their leaves, 2 leaves at a time, and especially if the yellowing leaf is in the middle or on top, then that you really have to, examine what exactly is happening with your orchid. Based on my observation, if your orchid is having root rot or stem rot or crown rot, the speed of the leaves turning yellow is super fast. But for the natural yellowing of a bottom leaf for an orchid, usually it takes quite a few weeks for that leaf to completely turn yellow. So you have to look at the speed of, the leaf turning yellow and determine whether there is anything that you really have to worry about. But if you look at this picture now, this is what you need to worry about. And this one had stem rot issue. This is one of my fragrant phal actually. But the story behind it is, originally this one was in spectrum moss when I first purchased it, and then I transferred it to semi-hydro. It did not like semi-hydro, so I had to unpot it after I think maybe 2 months, and then it just had very little root, so I cleaned it up. I decided that I want to use spectrum moss. But what happened was that the roots weren't healthy and it had very little root system, and I might have used a little bit too much sphagnum moss. It's still very lightly packed. It's not tightly packed. It's still pretty fluffy, but I suspect that it was just still a little bit too much moisture. So it had stem rot, and I didn't actually notice the stem rot until it was way beyond salvation. So this one is one of the ones that I recently killed, unfortunately. But thankfully, this orchid is still available, and I don't know. I probably would not get a replacement because I'm looking at my orchid growing shelf right now, and I still have too many orchids, right? So losing one here and there, I really don't want to replace them right away because I think it's okay for me to have fewer orchids. As much as I love orchids, sometimes I feel like this hobby, we really need to strike a good balance with this hobby, meaning, you like do what you like to look at them, but you also want to be able to do other things, and you want to be able to sleep at night without having to worry about your orchids, that kind of thing. Okay, another orchid. This one is a catasetum type orchid. This one is completely dry and dead, drop dead. Okay, so this is a keiki. This is a little tiny seedling. So it's moderate plant. I eventually had to separate them because that one was having some kind of infection from the very bottom of the base, and then it just started to spread upwards, and this seedling was at the very top of the mother plant. What was left of the mother plant remained with this baby for quite some time in leca beads in semi-hydro setup. In hindsight, now I think about it, I don't think that was the best setup for this orchid, but I did it anyway. I didn't know better. And then the remainder portion of the mother plant continued to shrink. It's normal because the baby needed nutrients, and at the time this baby only had 2 roots, but it grew more roots. And then eventually I had to cut away the mother portion because it was just getting so wrinkled and dried. And what happened was that since I had to do surgery, I had to take it out of the pot, and then with a few roots that I saw for this baby, I decided that maybe it would be okay to be potted in moss, so I did that. But what I didn't realize is that, even though I used very little amount of moss, it was still too much water. So it actually the pseudobulb actually rotted. So it was just a mistake. But overall, I think it's just so hard to take care of a catasetum type seedling like this, without mother plant, right? So I just probably didn't do the right thing for this plant, but then I probably didn't have the right environment for it either. So goodbye, pineapple popcorn. I think I will see you in the near future if I get a replacement. And here is the mini Dendrobium, one of the few Dendrobiums that I have or had. This one was in semi-hydro. It rotted all its roots because they didn't like it at first. So I tried full water culture with it, and it grew quite a few new growth and some new roots. However, as you can see here, I discovered that it was infested with lots of spider mites. So all the leaves, the backside of it, you see lots of pitting, and the newer growth also they were showing signs of spider mites. So I've actually done quite a few treatment with this orchid. However, after 2 months had gone by, even with isolation and ongoing treatment with this orchid, I just didn't see any signs of improvement. So eventually I really had to make a decision, a very hard decision, and that was that I just basically threw this plant away, because I didn't think that what I was doing worked on this orchid. Maybe it's the environment, maybe it was just so much spider mite, or maybe because what the chemical or the pesticide or fungicide that I had, systemic fungicide that I have or pesticide I had, was not the right type, because I didn't want to have that, let the problem spread to my other healthy orchids. So that's the hard decision I had to make. I basically let this plant go, and thankfully though, it's not a very expensive plant, even though as you see, it's got new growths and new roots coming out. Eventually it would have bounced back, but probably still with spider mites, so I didn't want to take my chances. And the last plant we're gonna look at is this Cattleya cernua. It's a miniature type Cattleya orchid. It was in semi-hydro too, but it didn't like it, rotted all the roots, as you could see earlier. So I put it in moss as well, but it's not really bouncing back, even though there is one new growth and it started to grow one root, but then it stopped again. A friend of mine told me that cernua really is best for grown mounted. But in my environment, I really don't think I can afford to have that kind of time to water this plant every day. So I'm gonna continue to put it in moss just to see if it'll grow back, and if not, then I think this would be one of the trashed or garbage can orchid, meaning I will have to throw it away, because as you can see right now, it's just not looking very good, and doesn't matter what I do with it. I've had this one for about 2 years, so it didn't die completely, but it's not growing very well either. So I'm pretty soon gonna have to make a decision on whether it's staying or it's gonna have to be thrown away. Anyway, today's video, I hope you like it. One of the reasons I make this video is that, with this hobby, there's always gonna be things that could go wrong, and it's okay to lose an orchid here and there, because things do happen. But I think along the process, it's always good for us to know the reasons. And so when next time around, if you have similar situations or exact the same situations, you would know how to do things differently in order to avoid the mistakes that you've made previously. And so to answer some of your questions, especially from my Chinese subscribers, Angus, do you still kill orchids? Do you still lose orchid from time to time? My answer is absolutely yes, I still do. So don't feel bad if you kill your orchids. It happens to all of us. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!